The ballroom of the Peninsula Hotel in Hong Kong glowed with the elegance characteristic of Asia's high social circles. Rose Kim watched her reflection in the gilded mirror of the luxurious bathroom, nervously adjusting the high collar of her understated black dress. Her fingers lightly brushed the small scar on her neck, a reminder of the laboratory accident that had changed her life 3 years ago. Dr. Kim, your results on nanoparticles are impressive. Her assistant Jennifer's voice echoed in her memory, moments before the explosion that had left its mark not only on her skin, but above all on her self-esteem. Now 32, Rose was one of Jean Biotech's most respected scientists, but her marriage to Max Jean, the company's CEO, had turned into an elaborate dance of appearances. She took the red lipstick from her bag, a gift from her best friend Minha Park, but hesitated before applying it. Ms. Jean, a hotel employee called out to her gently, "Your husband is asking for you. The presentation of the new investors will begin in a few minutes." Rose nodded, putting away her untouched lipstick. As she left the bathroom, her eyes met Max's imposing figure across the hall. Tall, well-lived at 38 and wearing an impeccable Italian suit, he was the very embodiment of success. His charismatic smile lit up the room as he chatted with Japanese executives, but Rose noticed when he checked his watch for the 3rd time. "He always does that," whispered Minha, appearing at his side with 2 glasses of champagne. "He looks for you, but when you show up, he acts as if you're invisible." Minha Park, marketing director of the rival company and Rose's best friend since their college days at Stanford, was everything Rose secretly wanted to be: confident, stunning, and in charge of herself. Her platinum hair and eye-catching red dress contrasted with Rose's discretion. "Don't start, ma'am." Rose picked up one of the glasses, sipping nervously. "You know things have been complicated since the accident." "Complicated?" "Rose, you've developed one of the most revolutionary cancer treatments of the decade, but you hide like a ghost." And he, Minha made a subtle gesture towards Max, who was now chatting animatedly with the young executive, acts as if he's ashamed of you. A familiar pain squeezed Rose's chest. Flashbacks of the beginning of her relationship with Max invaded her mind. The secret meetings in the lab after work, the whispered promises between kisses, the glint of admiration in his eyes when she explained her scientific theories. All this before the accident, before the scars, before the gradual withdrawal. "Ladies and gentlemen," Max's voice rang out through the microphone, interrupting Rose's thoughts. "It gives me great pleasure to announce our latest partnership with the Nakamura Group in Japan." Rose watched her husband speak as confidently as ever, but her eyes were drawn to the executive next to him, Sophia Chen, representing the Chinese market. Sophia smiled and complimented Max's every sentence with a natural grace that charmed everyone present. "This is great," Minha muttered, picking up her cell phone. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. at my apartment in Central. I won't take no for an answer." "Dude, you know I have a meeting at the lab. Cancelled. I've already spoken to Jennifer. Your assistant agrees with me. It's past time for a change." Before Rose could protest, Max approached, his eyes barely resting on her. "Rose, the Nakamuras want to meet the scientist behind the research. Can you come for a moment?" His tone was professional, distant, as if he were talking to any employee. During the conversation with the Japanese investors, Rose explained her research with her usual precision and passion. Mr. Nakamura, an elderly man with kind eyes, seemed genuinely interested, asking pertinent questions about the treatment development process. "Impressive, Dr. Kim," he commented in accented English. "Your dedication to science is admirable. You must be proud to have such a brilliant wife, Mr. Jean." Max's moment of hesitation was almost imperceptible, but for Rose, it was like a dagger. "Yes, the company is lucky to have Dr. Kim on our team," he replied diplomatically, avoiding any mention of their personal relationship. Later, in the car heading home, the silence between them was deafening. The driver navigated the illuminated streets of Hong Kong while Rose observed the city through the tinted glass, each gleaming building reflecting the duality of her own life: professional success, personal failure. The presentation was a success, Max finally commented, still typing on his cell phone. The Japanese were impressed with the preliminary results. That's good, Rose replied softly, her mind already on the appointment with Minha for the following day. Something inside her had changed that night. The imperfect reflection she saw in the hotel mirror was no longer enough to define who she was. Her cell phone vibrated with a message from Minha. Tomorrow your life changes. Trust me. Rose looked at her husband, absorbed in his work messages, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt something different from the usual resignation. It was a spark of determination, a desire for change that was beginning to burn in her chest. The car pulled up in front of her luxurious apartment in mid-levels, and as they rode up the elevator in silence, Rose made up her mind. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow she would begin to rewrite her story, not as the brilliant scientist who hid in the shadows, but as the woman she had always wanted to be. Little did she know that her decision would trigger a series of events that would transform not only her appearance, but her entire world and Max's, in ways that neither of them could have predicted. Minha Park's apartment in Central was exactly like her, bold and sophisticated. Huge floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, while works of contemporary art decorated the pristine white walls. Rose hesitated at the door, still wearing her traditional conservative ensemble. Finally, Minha opened the door with a beaming smile. I've brought reinforcements. To Rose's surprise, Jennifer, her lab assistant, was sitting on the modern sofa, along with the woman she recognized as Luna Chen, the famous image consultant for Asian celebrities. This is too much, Rose started to protest, but her friend interrupted her. No, it's not. It's exactly what's needed. Minha led her inside. You spend your days developing treatments that transform people's lives, but you refuse to transform your own. Luna approached, her experienced eyes analyzing Rose with professional interest. I see so much potential here. The bone structure is perfect. The eyes have a unique depth. She circled Rose, making notes on her tablet. What about the lab? Rose asked Jennifer, who smiled reassuringly. The tests are programmed to run automatically for 3 days. Apart from that, Jennifer hesitated, exchanging glances with Minha. We all agree that you need this. The next few hours were a roller coaster of emotions. Luna worked like an artist, first taking Rose to one of Hong Kong's most exclusive salons. The hairdresser, a man called James, transformed her long, lifeless black hair into a modern cut that perfectly framed her face, with subtle caramel-toned highlights. The scar on your neck? Rose asked nervously as Luna began to work on her makeup. We're not going to hide it completely, Luna replied with conviction. It's part of who you are. Let's integrate it into your new image in a way that conveys strength, not insecurity. Meanwhile, Minha and Jennifer were organizing a selection of clothes that had arrived from the city's most exclusive boutiques. Max has that charity dinner next weekend, Minha commented casually. The perfect event for his debut. Rose found herself recalling the morning of that day, when Max had barely noticed her at breakfast, concentrating on his business calls. I have a video conference with Seoul, he had said, hurrying off. Don't expect me for dinner. Ready to watch? Luna asked, swiveling Rose's chair towards the mirror. The reflection that stared back at her left her speechless. Her eyes, always hidden behind heavy-framed glasses, now shone brightly, highlighted by makeup that made them mysterious and mesmerizing. The scar on her neck, once her biggest complex, had been transformed into something almost artistic, complemented by a delicate necklace that drew attention to the elegance of her neck. I am. Rose touched her reflection in disbelief. You've always been beautiful, Jennifer said softly. Now you're just letting it show. Luna began explaining makeup and skincare techniques, while Minha organized the new clothes in the closet she had emptied especially for the occasion. Each piece was chosen to enhance your figure and convey confidence, Luna explained. But what if? Rose hesitated, her insecurities still present. What if Max doesn't like it? This makeover isn't for him, Minha said firmly. It's for you. Besides, a mischievous smile appeared on her lips. I have a plan for the charity dinner. The 3 women sat down while Minha explained her idea. The dinner would be a masked event, celebrating the Lunar New Year. It's perfect, she said. You'll appear as a complete stranger. Let's see how your husband reacts when he doesn't know it's you. That's crazy, Rose protested, but a part of her, a part that had been dormant for a long time, stirred at the idea. It's brilliant, Jennifer corrected. Think of it as a social experiment. Luna agreed, already making notes for a specific look for the event. I can create a completely different persona for you that night. No one will recognize the shy Dr. Kim. Rose looked at her reflection again, seeing beyond the physical transformation. Here was an opportunity to discover the truth about her marriage, about Max, and above all, about herself. What about my name? She finally asked, signaling her surrender to the plan. How about Aria? Suggested Luna. It means melody in Italian. Mysterious, sophisticated, perfect, Minha added. Aria Song, a successful businesswoman from Singapore, visiting Hong Kong to explore investment opportunities. As the women refined the details of the plan, Rose felt a mixture of anxiety and excitement that she hadn't experienced for years. Her cell phone vibrated with a message from Max. Meeting in Seoul extended. I'll be back in 3 days. 3 days is exactly the time we need, Minha declared, reading the message over Rose's shoulder. When he gets back, the transformation will be complete, and a week later, at the charity dinner, the real test will begin. Rose nodded, putting her cell phone away. A new determination was growing inside her, replacing years of insecurity. It was time to find out if her husband really loved her or if he had only married the brilliant scientist she represented. To the Aria project, Minha raised a glass of champagne, imitated by the others. To the Aria project, they replied in unison, their voices filled with complicity and expectation. From the apartment window, the sun was beginning to set over Hong Kong, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. It was as if the city itself was celebrating the beginning of this new phase in Rose Kim's life, or rather, Aria Song's life. The 3 days of Max's absence turned into intense preparation. Rose discovered muscles she hadn't known existed in her posture classes with Luna, learning to walk with a new elegance that made her high heels seem like natural extensions of her body. Breathe through your diaphragm, Luna instructed, adjusting Rose's posture as she practiced different accents for her Singaporean persona. Aria Song is a woman who commands the room as soon as she enters it. In the lab, Jennifer covered her absences efficiently, but Rose still held crucial video conferences, now with a renewed confidence that her colleagues noticed immediately. Dr. Kim, you seem different, commented a researcher from Seoul during a presentation. There's something special about you. On the eve of Max's return, Minha organized a dress rehearsal at the Peninsula's rooftop bar. Rose, now wearing an elegant midnight blue dress that hugged her curves with sophistication, attracted admiring glances as she moved among the local businessmen. Have you seen that German executive? Minha whispered, discreetly indicating a man who couldn't take his eyes off Rose. He's already asked who you are 3 times. Rose felt a familiar flush creep up her neck, but this time, instead of hiding, she allowed an enigmatic smile to play on her lips. Aria's Song isn't easily intimidated, she replied, surprising herself with her own boldness. Max's return was anticlimactic. He arrived late at night, exhausted from the trip, barely noticing the subtle changes in his wife, who purposely kept her new look discreet for the right moment. The next morning, Rose watched him leave for the office, feeling a mixture of anxiety and anticipation for what was to come. The days leading up to the charity dinner had been filled with painstaking preparations. Luna worked on a specially designed Venetian mask for Rose, decorated with crystals that complemented the blood-red dress chosen for the occasion. Remember, Luna emphasized during the last rehearsal, the mask is not just an accessory. It's your armor, your permission to be who you've always wanted to be. On the night of the event, the Great Hall of the Four Seasons was transformed into an oriental fairy tale setting. Red lanterns floated from the ceiling, creating a mystical atmosphere, while masks of all kinds hid the identities of Hong Kong's elite. Rose arrived separately, according to plan. Her heart was beating so loudly that she feared it could be heard through her silk dress. The flowing fabric danced around her legs with every step, and the mask, covering the upper part of her face, left only her red lips showing. "Breathe," Luna's voice echoed in her memory. "You're Arya's song now." Her entrance made exactly the impact she had planned. Conversation ceased momentarily. Eyes followed her figure as she moved with studied grace among the guests. Across the hall, through his own golden mask, Max John watched the newcomer with obvious interest. "Who is she?" Rose heard someone whisper. "She must be from that Singaporean family." Minha, wearing a silver mask, strategically approached Max. "Impressive, isn't she?" "Arya-san. They say her investment fund is looking for opportunities in biotechnology." Rose observed the exact moment when Max's professional interest was piqued. As planned, Minha made the necessary introductions, and soon Rose found herself face to face with her own husband, who looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Miss Son." Max bowed slightly, his polished American accent contrasting with Rose's carefully rehearsed Singaporean accent. "Welcome to Hong Kong." "Mr. Jean," she replied, her voice modulated to sound slightly deeper and more melodic. "Your reputation precedes you." Over the next hour, Rose experienced a version of her husband she hadn't seen for years. Max was charming, attentive, his eyes constantly searching hers through the masks. They talked about business, art, travel, and every shared laugh was a little stab in Rose's heart. "Dance with me?" he asked as the orchestra began to play a waltz. On the dance floor, Rose smelled Max's familiar perfume, his strong hands guiding her with the same assurance as years ago. For a moment, she almost gave in to the urge to reveal everything, to rip off the mask and confront him with the truth. "You remind me of someone," Max commented softly, his eyes trying to penetrate beyond the mask. "Someone important?" Rose asked, her heart racing. There was a hesitation. "I'm not sure," he replied, and Rose tasted the bitterness of the lie. She knew he was thinking about his wife, but not in the way he should. The song ended, but the game had only just begun. While Max was called to give his opening speech, Rose retreated to the terrace, needing a moment to collect herself. The cool Hong Kong night air caressed her face. "Are you all right?" Minho appeared at her side, offering her a glass of champagne. "I don't know if I can go through with this," Rose confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "You can and you will," Minho affirmed with conviction. "Because this isn't just a lesson for Max. It's your chance to rediscover who you really are, beyond the skies, beyond the lab, beyond the role of perfect wife." Rose watched the city lights, each one a reminder of the infinite possibilities the night still held. Inside the salon, she could hear Max's voice on the microphone, confident and charismatic as ever. "What happens now?" she asked, more to herself than to me. "Now," her friend smiled mysteriously, "we begin the real test. Are you ready to make your husband fall in love with you twice?" The morning after the charity ball brought a new dynamic to the Jean mansion. Rose watched Max during breakfast, noticing how he obsessively checked his cell phone, probably waiting for news about Arya-san. His distracted behavior was different from his usual disinterest. There was a nervous energy in his movements that she never saw when she was with his wife. "Dinner was a success," Rose commented casually, testing the waters. "I hear an investor from Singapore got a lot of attention." Max almost knocked over his coffee cup. "Were you there? I didn't see you all night." "I only stayed a moment," she lied softly. "I had some work to finish in the lab." Max's cell phone vibrated, and his eyes lit up as he read the message. Rose knew it was mine, executing the next phase of the plan, an invitation to a business lunch with Arya-san at the exclusive Lung King Heen restaurant. "I have to go," Max announced, standing up abruptly. "Important meeting." The moment he left, Rose ran to the secret closet that Minha had prepared in her apartment. In less than an hour, Arya-san emerged from the elevator of the Four Seasons, where the 3-star Michelin restaurant occupied the highest floor. "Mr. Jean," she greeted Max with that carefully studied Singaporean accent. "What a pleasure to see you again." Lunch was an elaborate dance of words and gestures. Rose watched fascinated as her husband transformed in Arya's presence, more animated, more attentive, even more jovial. He shared stories he had never told her, spoke of dreams and fears he kept hidden from his wife. Sometimes I wonder, Max confessed after his second glass of wine, if I chose the right path. You know, marrying someone out of admiration isn't the same as love. The comment hit Rose like a punch in the gut, but Arya just tilted her head, curious. And what's the difference, in your opinion? Admiration is safe, predictable. You know exactly what you're getting. He paused, his eyes fixed on Arya. Love is scary. It's unpredictable. That's how you make me feel right now. Rose felt her heart race, not with joy, but with deep pain. All her suspicions were being confirmed in a crueler way than she had imagined. Lunch stretched on for hours, and when they finally said goodbye, Max held Arya's hand for a moment longer than necessary. Can we see each other again? Maybe. Arya replied enigmatically, gently withdrawing her hand. Fate will tell. In the taxi back to Minha's apartment, Rose finally allowed the tears to fall. Her friend was waiting for her with a bottle of wine and his shoulder to cry on. He never really loved me, Rose sobbed. All these years. No, Minha interrupted her firmly. He's fallen in love with you twice now. The question is, does he deserve either version? That night, alone in her bed while Max worked late at the office, Rose mentally reviewed every moment of the day. As a scientist, she had always believed in data and evidence. Now she had concrete proof of what her marriage really meant. Her cell phone vibrated with a message from Jennifer. The lad's latest tests had been a complete success. His work, at least, remained his safe haven. But even this certainty was changing. For the first time in years, Rose realized that her identity didn't have to be tied solely to her scientific achievements or her role as a wife. What do you want to do now? Minha had asked before Rose left. The answer was beginning to form in her mind, clear as a perfectly balanced chemical formula. This social experiment was no longer just about testing Max's love. It was about discovering his own strength, his own capacity for transformation. As the calm night shone through the bedroom windows, Rose began to plan her next move. Arya-san had more lessons to teach, not just to Max, but to herself. And perhaps, in the process of unmasking the truth about her marriage, she would finally find the courage to face her own truths. The sound of the elevator announced Max's arrival. Rose closed her eyes, pretending to sleep, as she listened to the familiar footsteps in the hallway. For the first time since starting the sparse, she felt no guilt, only a growing determination to see where this mirror game would take her. The busy streets of Seoul greeted Rose with their familiar frenzy when she landed at Incheon International Airport. The sudden trip had been planned with me. Officially, Dr. Kim would be attending a scientific symposium. Unofficially, Arya-san would have an important business meeting in the South Korean capital. Are you sure about this? Minha's voice sounded worried over the phone as Rose settled into her suite at the Signeal Hotel. Taking this game to another country is risky. Max is coming to Seoul tomorrow for the meeting with investors, Rose replied, watching the city through the huge windows. And Arya will coincidentally be in the same hotel. The plan was bold, but calculated. Rose knew her husband wouldn't be able to resist the temptation of a chance meeting with the mysterious Singaporean businesswoman, especially away from the watchful eyes of Hong Kong. That evening, while organizing the documents for her presentation at the symposium, Rose received a message from Max. I'll be late. Don't worry about waiting up. The coldness of the text contrasted dramatically with the ardent messages he had sent to Arya's number in recent weeks. The next morning, the symposium at Seoul National University served as the perfect stage for Dr. Kim to shine in her element. Her presentation on advances in nanotechnology was enthusiastically received by the scientific community. Among the audience, a familiar face caught her eye. Dr. James Park, her former Stanford colleague and first love. Rose. James greeted her after the lecture, his gentle smile still the same as years ago. Your work is still impressive. The unexpected encounter with James brought a new layer of complexity to the already complicated game Rose was playing. As they ate lunch in a traditional restaurant in Incheon, memories of their college days flowed naturally. You look different, James observed, his eyes studying her face intently. More confident, more free? Rose added, surprising herself with her honesty. The afternoon passed quickly between conversations about research and shared memories. James, now a full professor in Seoul, talked about his own projects and, subtly, about his recent divorce. As the sun began to set, Rose returned to the hotel for her transformation into Arya. Luna had prepared an emerald green dress that highlighted her curves in an elegant but discreet way. The mask, this time, was dispensable. Seoul would be the stage for a more intimate encounter. The bar on the top floor of the Signal offered a spectacular view of the illuminated city. Rose knew Max would be there. His assistant had accidentally mentioned Arya-san's presence during a work call. As expected, she found him sitting at the bar, his eyes fixed on the cityscape. The moment he noticed her was almost cinematic. His posture changed instantly, the tiredness of the working day giving way to renewed energy. "Miss Son," he stood up, his voice betraying surprise and pleasure. "What a pleasant coincidence." "Mr. Jean," Arya replied in her carefully modulated accent. Seoul really is a city of unexpected encounters. The next few hours were an exercise in self-control for Rose. Watching her husband go out of his way to impress Arya was both fascinating and painful. Every smile, every casual touch on her arm, every story shared was a small betrayal of the woman he believed he was in Hong Kong. "There's something about you," Max confessed after his second whiskey. Something familiar and, at the same time, completely new. Rose felt her heart race. "Maybe I just represent something you lost a long time ago," she replied enigmatically. The conversation was interrupted by Max's cell phone. It was a call from Rose. She had set her other phone to ring at that particular moment, testing his reaction. "Sorry, I have to take this," he said, walking away quickly. Rose watched as he spoke briefly to your wife, his body language tense and impatient. When he returned, his apology was vague and hurried. "Work," he lied softly. "It never stops." The rest of the evening passed in a ballet of half-truths and meaningful glances. When they finally said goodbye, Max held her hand once more, his fingers caressing her skin in a way he hadn't done with Rose for years. "Have dinner with me tomorrow?" he asked, almost pleadingly. "There's a special place I'd like to show you." Arya hesitated, calculating her answer. "Perhaps," she smiled mysteriously. "Fate will decide." Back in her room, Rose finally allowed the tears to fall. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from James. "It was good to see you today. You deserve to be happy, Rose. Really happy." Those simple words triggered an avalanche of emotions. Rose realized that her experiment was revealing much more than just Max's potential infidelity. It was showing her how much she had lost in this marriage. As the Seoul night pulsed outside, Rose began to question not only Max's love, but her own role in this elaborate farce. Arya's mask was becoming more comfortable than her own skin, and this realization was both liberating and frightening. On her laptop, an email from Minha flashed urgently. "I found out something about Max that you need to know. Call me when you can." Rose looked at the phone, then at her reflection in the mirror. Who is she really now? The dedicated scientist, the neglected wife, or this new woman she was discovering through Arya? The answer, she realized, was perhaps none of these options, or perhaps it was all of them. Minha's message couldn't have come at a more crucial moment. "Max is involved in something bigger than we imagined," her friend explained during the video call the following morning. "I found documents that suggest he's planning to sell the company's research division to the Nakamura Group." Rose felt her blood run cold. The research division was her refuge, the place where her discoveries were changing lives. It means he intends to get rid of you professionally as well," Minha added, her voice laced with indignation. "The contract is practically ready. He's just waiting for the right moment." The revelation hit Rose like a tsunami. As she prepared for her second day at the symposium, her mind worked in several directions. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together. The secret meetings, the frequent trips to Tokyo, the Nakamura's sudden interest in her projects. In the university auditorium, Rose met James again. Her former love now seemed like an anchor of stability in the midst of the chaos that her life had become. "You look upset," he observed during the break, offering her a coffee. "Can I help you?" Rose hesitated. James always had a keen intuition for her moods, even after so many years. "It's complicated," she replied, playing with the disposable cup. "Do you ever get the feeling that your whole life is an out-of-control science experiment?" James smiled understandingly. "Still thinking like the scientist I knew at Stanford, always wanting to control all the variables." His comment touched something deep in Rose. It was true, even her revenge was being conducted as a meticulously controlled experiment. But real life rarely followed laboratory protocols. In the afternoon, as she transformed into Aria for her meeting with Max, Rose made a decision. It was time to add some unexpected variables to the equation. Max's chosen restaurant was JN, 3 Michelin stars, known for its modern interpretation of traditional Korean cuisine. Rose purposely arrived late, knowing that anticipation would increase Max's interest. "I thought you were coming," he commented when she finally appeared, looking stunning in a black dress that Luna had chosen especially for the occasion. "Life is full of surprises, Mr. Jean," Aria replied, sitting down gracefully. "So is business." During dinner, Rose skillfully steered the conversation towards the topic of corporate acquisitions. "I've heard interesting rumors about John Biotech," she commented casually. "Something about a possible sale to the Japanese?" Max almost choked on his wine. "News travels fast," he recovered, adjusting his tie. "But they're just rumors, of course." "Of course," Aria smiled enigmatically. "Although I wonder what your wife, the brilliant Dr. Kim, thinks about it." It was the first time Rose had directly mentioned her other self during their meetings, and the effect was visible. Max paled slightly, his smile faltering. "Rose, Dr. Kim is focused on her research," he replied, avoiding her gaze. "She understands that corporate decisions are sometimes necessary, even if those decisions destroy years of dedicated work." The silence that followed was deafening. Max finally looked directly at her, a shadow of suspicion crossing his face. "You seem to know a lot about our company, Miss Son." "I do my homework, Mr. John," Aria replied softly. "That's why I'm good at what I do." The rest of dinner passed in a tense dance of calculated words and intense glances. When Max suggested they continue the evening in the hotel bar, Rose realized it was time for her next move. "Unfortunately, I have another appointment," she apologized, getting up, "but perhaps we can continue our conversation in Hong Kong. I hear the botanical garden is especially beautiful at this time of year." The mention of the botanical garden was no accident. It was where Max had proposed to Rose 5 years ago. For a moment, she saw something flash across his eyes, a glimmer of recognition quickly replaced by confusion. Back in her room, Rose found a message from James. "Dinner tomorrow? I promise not to talk about science." She looked at her reflection in the mirror, observing how the different facets of her life were intertwining in unexpected ways. Rose Kim, the dedicated scientist, Aria Song, the mysterious businesswoman, and now James Park, a connection to a simpler, more honest past. His phone vibrated with a message from Max. "I need to see you again. There's something about you that I can't explain." Rose smiled bitterly. Her husband was right. There was something inexplicable going on, but not in the way he imagined. As the lights of Seoul shone through the window, she began to plan her next move, knowing that the game was about to become much more complex. The truth about the sale of the company added a new urgency to her mission. It was no longer just about saving her marriage or getting revenge on Max. It was about protecting years of research that could save lives. And, perhaps, in the process, saving herself. The news of the possible sale of the research division to the Nakamura Group echoed in Rose's mind as she walked through the corridors of the Signal Hotel. Her phone vibrated constantly with messages from Max, each one more insistent than the last, all addressed to Aria. "We need to talk about a potential partnership," said the last message. Rose knew that partnership had a much more personal meaning than a professional one. Dinner with James that evening offered a welcome break from the complexity that her double life had become. The restaurant chosen was a small traditional establishment in Hongdae, far from the glamour of the places frequented by Max. Remember when we used to come to places like this in Stanford? James asked, pouring them both some soju. You always said that the best science happened in the simplest conversations. Rose smiled, memories of a more uncomplicated time flooding her mind. We were so idealistic, she replied, twirling the glass between her fingers. We believed we could change the world with our research alone. And you are, James said sincerely. I've read your latest articles on nanotechnology. It's revolutionary work, Rose. The mention of her research brought her back to her current reality. Work that can be sold without my consent, she muttered, more to herself than to James. What do you mean? Concern was evident in his voice. Rose hesitated, but something in the way James looked at her, with that familiar mixture of understanding and protection, made her open up. She told him about Max's plans, about Aria, about the whole elaborate scheme she had created. That's impressive and frightening at the same time, James commented after hearing everything. But why not just confront him directly? Because I need to understand how far he'll go, Rose replied, surprising herself with her own honesty. It's not just about marriage anymore. It's about my work, my identity. James reached across the table, lightly touching her fingers. You've always been about more than your work or your marriage, Rose. Even at Stanford, there was something special about you that had nothing to do with science. The touch brought back a wave of memories. Nights studying together in the library, shared theories over cups of coffee, a stolen kiss in the lab late at night. A life that seemed to belong to someone else now. The moment was interrupted by Rose's cell phone. It was mine with more information about the sale. The Nakamuras are in Seoul, her friend informed her. Secret meeting with Max tomorrow at the Park Hyatt. After dinner, James insisted on accompanying her to the hotel. The Seoul night was particularly beautiful, the city lights reflecting in the puddles left by a recent rainstorm. I can help, he offered as they walked. I have contacts in the scientific community who could interfere with the sale. Rose stopped, turning to him. Why would you do that? Because you deserve better than to be betrayed personally and professionally, James replied simply. And because I've never stopped caring. In the hotel lobby, Rose spotted Max returning from a business dinner. On reflex, she hid behind a pillar, pulling James with her. The sudden movement brought them dangerously close, their faces centimeters apart. Sorry, she whispered, but didn't move away. I'm not sorry, James replied softly, his eyes fixed on hers. The moment was interrupted by the sound of heels on the marble of the lobby. Sophia Chen, the executive whom Rose had noticed was too close to Max in Hong Kong, was walking beside him, laughing at something he had said. She's involved in the sale, Rose realized, watching as Sophia casually touched Max's arm. She's the bridge to the Nakamuras. James followed her gaze, his expression hardening. You're not alone in this fight, Rose. Let me help. Back in her room, Rose stared at her reflection in the mirror as she removed her makeup. Tomorrow it would be Aria again, facing Max at the meeting with the Nakamuras. She had already convinced Minha to get an invitation through her contacts. Her phone rang. It was Jennifer from Hong Kong. The results of the latest tests are impressive, Dr. Kim. But there's something strange. Some data seems to have been altered in the system. Rose felt her stomach sink. The sale wasn't the only betrayal going on. Someone was manipulating her research, and she had a strong suspicion who it might be. Lying in bed later, Rose contemplated the different versions of herself that had emerged over the last few days. The dedicated scientist, the hurt wife, the seductive Aria, and now, possibly, the woman James still saw when he looked at her. Tomorrow would be a decisive day. At the meeting with the Nakamuras, Aria's song would make her boldest move yet. But first, Rose Kim had an important call to make. It was time to bring more allies to her cause. Hello, Mr. Nakamura, she spoke in fluent Japanese. This is Dr. Kim. We need to talk about the true value of my research. The plan was expanding, evolving beyond a simple personal vendetta. It was time to protect not only her heart, but also her scientific legacy. And perhaps, in the process, rediscover who she really was among all those masks. The Park Hyatt Seoul shone like a crystal tower against the morning sky when Rose, transformed into Arya Som, walked through its revolving doors. Her presence at the meeting with the Nakamuras had been carefully orchestrated through Minha's contacts, who had ensured that she would represent a Singaporean investment fund interested in the acquisition. Miss Son. Max greeted her with obvious surprise and pleasure when she entered the conference room on the 35th floor. I didn't expect to see you here. Business takes us to unexpected places, doesn't it? She replied with an enigmatic smile, noticing how Sophia Chen frowned slightly at her presence. Mr. Nakamura, who had already chatted secretly with Rose the night before, maintained a neutral expression while the introductions were made. The double game was in full swing. While Arya Son feigned interest in the acquisition, Rose Kim had already planted seeds of doubt in the Japanese businessman's mind about the legitimacy of the transaction. As you can see from the figures, Max began his presentation. The research division represents a unique opportunity for expansion in the Asian market. Rose watched intently as he presented graphs and projections, each slide revealing more about how he planned to dismantle years of dedicated work. Her hand discreetly squeezed the USB stick in her pocket, evidence of the data manipulations Jennifer had uncovered. Excuse me, Mr. Jean. Arya interrupted at a crucial moment, but these results seem overly optimistic, especially considering the recent changes in research data. The silence that followed was deafening. Max stopped mid-sentence, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of confusion and alarm. Sophia Chen shifted uncomfortably in her chair. What changes would those be, Ms. Son? Mr. Nakamura asked, his calm voice masking intense interest. Maybe we should take a break, Sophia suggested quickly, but Arya raised an elegant hand. Why don't we ask Dr. Kim? She suggested, relishing the moment. After all, it's her research that's being discussed. Or wasn't she invited to this meeting? Max's face paled slightly. Dr. Kim is busy with her experiments. She trusts the company's corporate decisions. Even when those decisions involve manipulating data? Arya pressed, sliding a folder across the table. These documents show systematic changes in the results over the last 6 months. Mr. Nakamura took the folder, his keen eyes examining the papers. Sophia Chen stood up abruptly, muttering something about making an important connection. How did you get access to this data? Max asked, his voice tense. I have my resources, Mr. John, just as I'm sure Dr. Kim has hers. The meeting was quickly suspended after this revelation. As the executives dispersed into whispering groups, Max took Arya's arm, guiding her to a secluded corner. Who are you really? He asked, his eyes searching her face. Rose felt her heart racing, but kept her composure. Someone who believes that the truth always finds its way, Mr. Jean. That afternoon, while preparing to meet James to discuss the next steps, Rose received an urgent message from Jennifer. Sophia Chen had been seen in the lab in Hong Kong, accessing restricted files. She's trying to erase the evidence, James concluded when Rose shared the information during their meeting in a discreet cafe in Gangnam. We need to act fast, Rose agreed, but her words were interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Minha, who had flown in hurriedly from Hong Kong. You won't believe what I found out, Minha said, sitting down with them. The sale to the Nakamuras is just the tip of the iceberg. Max and Sophia are planning to use their research to develop something completely different from the original treatment. Rose felt the blood run cold in her veins. How different? Military applications. Minha lowered her voice. The Nakamura Group is just a front for a larger consortium. James placed a protective hand over Rose's. That explains the manipulation of the data. They're adapting the results to show potential in other areas. Rose's cell phone vibrated. It was Max, or rather a message for Arya. We need to talk. Dinner tonight? There are things I need to explain. Rose looked at her allies, a decision forming in her mind. It's time to end this game, she declared. But we need to do it the right way. As the sun set over Seoul, 3 people in a discreet cafe began to plot a plan that would change not only the fate of scientific research, but also the course of several lives. Arya Son's mask had served its purpose well, but now it was time for Rose Kim to take back control of her life and her legacy. Dinner with Max was scheduled for the exclusive La Yun restaurant on the top floor of the Shilla Hotel. Rose, still as Arya, chose a navy blue dress that Luna had specially selected for moments of power. The latest discoveries about the true purpose of the sale had turned this meeting into something much more significant than just another act in their elaborate performance. Remember, James had said during a strategy meeting earlier, "You're in control now. They need your original data to validate any changes they've made." Rose adjusted the tiny recording device in her earring, courtesy of Minha, who is now working in coordination with Jennifer to monitor suspicious activities in the Hong Kong lab. Max was already waiting for her when she arrived, his face tense despite his rehearsed smile. "Miss Som," he stood up to pull out his chair, "you look as stunning as ever. Shall we dispense with the formalities tonight, Mr. Jom?" Arya suggested, noticing how he constantly checked his phone. "It seems we have more pressing matters to discuss." The sommelier interrupted briefly to present the wine, an award-winning Bordeaux that Max chose with obvious nervousness. Rose noticed how his hands trembled slightly as he held the glass. "About this morning's meeting," he began after a long sip, "I need to clarify a few points. The information you presented about the manipulation of Dr. Kim's data," Arya added softly, "or about the real purpose of the sale to the Nakamura?" Mock spelled fishably. "How do you? I have my resources," she interrupted, leaning slightly on the table. "Just as I'm sure Dr. Kim has hers. After all, she's not only a brilliant scientist, but also your wife. Or have you forgotten that detail?" "Rose, Dr. Kim understands that corporate decisions sometimes require certain sacrifices," he replied, but his voice betrayed uncertainty. "Sacrifices like turning medical research into military technology?" Arya pressed, watching every micro-expression on Max's face. "Or sacrifices like betraying not only your wife, but also your ethical principles?" The silence that followed was interrupted by the arrival of the first course. Rose noticed how Max barely touched the elaborate seafood presentation, his mind clearly elsewhere. "It's not that simple," he finally said, his voice low. "There are powerful people involved. The consortium behind the Nakamura, they won't take no for an answer." "And Sophia Chen? What exactly is her role in all this?" The mention of her name made Max choke on his wine. "How do you know about Sophia?" "The same way I know about her visits to the lab today," Arya replied, sliding her phone across the table with photos sent by Jennifer. "It's interesting how someone from the commercial sector has such an interest in scientific data, don't you think?" Max's face alternated between pallor and blush. "You don't understand, they have something against me. Something that could destroy everything I've built. And destroying your wife's research is the solution?" Arya asked, her voice carrying a hint of emotion that surprised even Rose. "Rose, she lives for her work. She wouldn't understand the complexities of the corporate world." Max tried to justify, but his words sounded empty even to himself. "Maybe she understands more than you think," Arya replied, her gaze fixed on his eyes. "Maybe she's learned to wear masks too." The comment made Max frown, studying Arya's face more closely. For a moment, Rose feared she had gone too far, but the sound of her phone broke the tension. It was an urgent message from James. "Sophia has just bought a ticket to Tokyo. Flight in 3 hours." Rose knew it was time to accelerate her plan. "Mr. Jean," she resumed, her voice now carrying an authority that made Max straighten up in his chair, "I have a proposal for you. Tomorrow, noon, at the Jean Biotech Research Center in Hong Kong. Bring the Nakamuras, Sophia, and especially Dr. Kim." "Why?" Max asked, clearly suspicious. "Because it's time for everyone to see the truth without masks," she replied, standing up. "And, believe me, you'll want to be on the right side of history when that happens." Leaving Max stunned in the restaurant, Rose headed straight for Minha's apartment, where James and Jennifer, by video call, were already waiting for her. It was time to put the final phase of her plan into action. "Are the original documents safe?" she asked Jennifer. "All backed up and notarized," her assistant confirmed. "And I have one more thing. I found old emails between Sophia and the consortium. They've been planning this for over a year." James approached Rose, noticing how her hands trembled slightly as she removed the recording device. "Are you sure you want to do this tomorrow?" I do, she replied, meeting his eyes with determination. It's time for Rose Kim to show who she really is. The Seoul night shone through the windows, the city lights reflecting in the unshed tears in Rose's eyes. Tomorrow, all the masks would fall, and with them, perhaps, the last illusions about her marriage. But for the first time in a long time, she felt no fear, just a calm certainty that, regardless of the outcome, she was finally being true to herself. The flight from Seoul to Hong Kong was fraught with tension. Rose, now back to her usual appearance, watched the clouds through the airplane window as she mentally went over every detail of the plan. Next to her, James was typing furiously on his laptop, finalizing the presentation that would expose the whole truth about the data manipulation. Jennifer confirmed that all the backups are safe, he whispered, leaning towards her. Mine gained access to the lab's security cameras. We have Sophia red-handed altering the files. Rose nodded, her mind going back to the night before, when Max had called her, his wife, not Aria, for the first time in days. We need to talk about the company, he had said, his voice tense. There's an important meeting tomorrow. Of course, dear, she had replied sweetly, imagining his expression when all the masks finally fell away. The Jean Biotech Research Center was an impressive glass and steel building in the heart of Hong Kong's financial district. When Rose and James arrived, Minha was already waiting for them in the lobby, impeccable in his red suit. The Nakamuras have just arrived, she informed them, guiding them to the elevators. Max is with them in the conference room on the 30th floor. Sophia hasn't shown up yet. She will, Rose said with certainty. She's got a lot to lose if she doesn't. The conference room was set up like a stage for the final showdown. Huge screens displayed seemingly normal graphs and data, but Rose knew that with one click, the truth would be revealed. Rose, Max stood up as he saw her enter, surprise evident on his face as he noticed James at her side. I didn't know we'd have extra guests. Dr. Park is an expert in data validation, she explained softly. I thought it would be useful to have him here, considering the circumstances. Mr. Nakamura, who had secretly talked to Rose days before, maintained a neutral expression, but his eyes sparkled with shared knowledge. His youngest son, Kenji Nakamura, looked restless, constantly checking his phone. The door opened again and Sophia Chen entered, stopping abruptly when she saw the full assembly. Sorry I'm late, she muttered, choosing a seat strategically distant from Max. Now that we're all here, Rose began, moving to the front of the room, I'd like to present some interesting data about our research. With a click of the remote control, the screens changed, showing two sets of data side by side. On the left, we have the original results of the nanotechnology tests for cancer treatment. On the right, the modified versions. The silence in the room was palpable. Max straightened up in his chair, his expression fluctuating between shock and fear. Dr. Kem, Sophia tried to intervene. Perhaps we should discuss this in private. How do we discuss the real purpose of a sale? Rose questioned, her voice calm but cutting. Or, how do we discuss the military applications you have planned for my research? Kenji Nakamura stood up abruptly, but his father stopped him with a gesture. Go on, Dr. Kim, Mr. Nakamura encouraged. Rose went through the slides, methodically exposing every alteration, every manipulation, every betrayal. James complimented her with technical analyses, while Minha distributed folders with documentary evidence. The consortium, Max finally said, his voice breaking. They pressured us. They threatened. Threatened what, Max? Rose interrupted. Your reputation? Your power? Or did they threaten to expose how you've been manipulating data for years to inflate share values? Sophia paled, standing up. That's defamation. You can't prove. I can prove everything, Rose replied calmly, signaling to Jennifer, who appeared on the screen via video conference, including your secret meetings with representatives of the military consortium, the bank transfers, the emails. The ensuing chaos was controlled, but intense. Kenji Nakamura tried to leave the room, only to find security guards, hired by Minha, blocking the door. Sophia began to cry, while Max remained silent, defeated. But there's something else you should know, Rose continued, her voice trembling slightly. Something about a certain businesswoman from Singapore called Arya-san. Max's eyes widened in horrified recognition as Rose began to speak with the accent he had learned to crave over the past few weeks. Mr. Nakamura smiled discreetly, already aware of this part of the plan. You fell in love with the same woman twice, Max, Rose concluded, unshed tears glistening in her eyes. And you betrayed both versions of her. The silence that followed Rose's revelation was thick enough to suffocate. Max remained motionless in his chair, his face a mask of shock and disbelief as he processed that Arya-san, the woman who had bewitched him over the past few weeks, was actually his own wife. Impossible, he muttered, more to himself than to the others. How did I manage to fool you so easily? Rose added, her voice now alternating naturally between Arya's tones and her own. Maybe because you never really looked at me, Max. Not after the accident. Mr. Nakamura snorted softly, breaking the tension. Dr. Kim, or should I say Miss Son, he smiled slightly. Your presentation was very enlightening. I believe we have some important decisions to make. Sophia Chen, who had remained silent, tried to get up again, but Minha discreetly blocked her exit. We're not finished here, she said firmly. James moved on with the presentation, displaying the documents that proved the conspiracy on the screens. The military consortium planned to use Dr. Kim's technology to develop nanoparticles with neural manipulation capabilities, he explained. Basically, to turn a cancer treatment into a mind control weapon. It was a business opportunity, Kenji Nakamura protested, but his father silenced him with a stern look. It was a betrayal, Mr. Nakamura corrected. To science, to ethics, and above all, to the trust placed in all of us. Rose walked slowly to stand in front of Max, who still couldn't face her. Remember our first night at Stanford? She asked softly. When you said that my passion for science was the most beautiful thing you'd ever seen? Max finally raised his eyes, meeting hers. Rose, that passion is still here, she continued. Even after the accident, even after you started avoiding me, even after all the lies. The difference is that now it's no longer just about science. It's for myself. Jennifer, still in the video conference, interrupted urgently. Dr. Kim, we've detected remote access attempts on our servers. Someone is trying to delete files. All eyes turned to Sophia, who had discreetly pulled out a tablet. Mine was quicker, snatching the device out of her hands. Too late, James announced with a satisfied smile. We've implemented a quantum backup system. Every attempt to alter it only creates more evidence. Mr. Nakamura stood up, his presence commanding immediate attention. As president of the Nakamura Group, I officially announce our withdrawal from any negotiations with John Biotech. He paused significantly, looking at Max, unless significant changes in leadership are implemented. You can't do that, Max protested weakly. The board is already being informed, Minha interrupted, showing his phone. As is the press. The story of the brilliant scientist who uncovered an international conspiracy to militarize her cancer research? The papers will love it. Rose felt a wave of exhaustion hit her. Months of planning, weeks of living a double life, all culminating in this moment. James noticed her fatigue and discreetly pulled out a chair for her. There is one more thing, she said, sitting down. During my research as Arya, I discovered other projects that were manipulated, other research that was diverted from its original purpose. The next 2 hours were dedicated to exposing a complex web of corruption and manipulation that extended far beyond John Biotech. When they finally finished, the sun was setting over Hong Kong, painting the conference room in golden hues that seemed ironically inappropriate for the moment. What happens now? Kenji Nakamura asked, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine concern. Now, Rose replied, standing up with new energy. We start to rebuild. Research returns to its original purpose. The company is undergoing a complete restructuring. She looked directly at Max, and some of us are starting to face the consequences of our choices. Max finally seemed to wake up from his stupor. Rose, I know I made a mistake. But everything I did, it was for power, she added. Not for love, not for science, not even for money. Just for the power to control something, since I couldn't control how you felt about me after the accident. The silence that followed was interrupted only by the soft sound of the city outside, millions of lives taking their course, oblivious to the drama unfolding on the 30th floor of a glass skyscraper. The news of Jean Biotech's restructuring exploded in the Asian media like a tsunami. From her office window, Rose watched the news vans parked in front of the company building as she tried to process the events of the last 48 hours. The shareholders are demanding Max's immediate resignation, Minha informed her, entering the room with a stack of newspapers. The board has called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. Rose nodded distractedly, her eyes fixed on a picture on the front page of the South China Morning Post, her and Max at a charity event years ago, before the accident, when they still looked like the perfect couple. The irony didn't escape her. Mr. Nakamura called, James commented, entering the room with 2 coffees. He had become a constant presence in recent days, a pillar of stability in the midst of chaos. He wants you to lead the new independent research division, without corporate interference. And Max? Rose asked, accepting her coffee with a grateful smile. Still locked up at home, Minha replied. Sophia Chun was seen boarding a flight to Singapore this morning. Apparently, the military consortium isn't too happy about the failure of the operation. Jennifer appeared at the computer screen, her expression worried. Dr. Kim, we've found more compromising files. It seems that the data manipulation began much earlier than we imagined. Rose closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the night before. After the explosive meeting, she had returned to the apartment she shared with Max only to find him sitting in the dark, a half-empty bottle of whiskey by his side. Why Arya? He had asked, his voice breaking. Why create all this farce? Because I needed to see if you were still capable of loving me, she had replied simply. And you proved that you were, just not the real version of me. The sound of her phone brought her back to the present. It was a message from her mother in Seoul. I saw the news. Your father and I are worried. You should go visit them, James suggested gently, noticing her expression. Maybe some time at home is exactly what you need right now. There's a lot of work to be done here, Rose protested, but Mai interrupted her. The work will always be here. But you need to heal, Rose. Not just the physical scars, but the emotional ones too. A knock on the door interrupted the conversation. It was one of the company's lawyers, carrying papers that required his immediate signature. Rose looked them over. They were documents formalizing her new role as Director of Research and Development, independent of the traditional corporate hierarchy. The board is impressed by your integrity, the lawyer commented, and frightened by your connections. Mr. Nakamura has a lot of power in the Asian market. After his departure, Rose allowed herself a moment of reflection. The last few weeks, as Arya had taught her more about herself than years of self-analysis. The mask she had created to expose the truth had ended up revealing her own inner strength. You know what's ironic? She commented to James, who had remained silently by her side. Max always said he fell in love with me because of my dedication to science. But when that same dedication threatened his plans for power, he didn't hesitate to try to destroy it. Some people confuse love with possession, James replied softly. Others, with admiration. Few understand that true love is about growing together, not about controlling or idolizing. A movement in the corridor caught her eye. It was Max, escorted by security guards, coming out of his office with a box of personal belongings. Their gazes met through the glass, and for a moment Rose saw in him the young assistant professor. She had fallen in love with that Stanford. He'll try to come back, she warned me, watching the scene. Men like Max don't give up power easily. Let him try, Rose replied with a confidence that surprised even herself. I'm not the same person he knew. I'm not even the same person he betrayed. The rest of the afternoon was spent meeting with the research team, establishing new protocols, and ensuring that all the original data was preserved. Jennifer coordinated the implementation of a more robust security system, while James offered valuable insights into intellectual property protection. At the end of the day, exhausted but satisfied, Rose found a small package on her desk. Inside was a Venetian mask, the same one she had worn as Arya, with a note from Luna. Some masks help us find our true face. Dinner? James asked, standing in the doorway with his work folder. I know a great place in Wan Chai that serves the best kimchi outside of Korea. Rose looked at the mask in his hands, then at the man who had become much more than an old love rediscovered. He was now a symbol of future possibilities, of a love based on truth and mutual acceptance. Dinner would be perfect, she replied, putting the mask away in the drawer. It was time to live without disguises. The news of Rose and Max Zhang's separation circulated through Hong Kong business circles with the speed of a digital tsunami. The local tabloids talked about nothing else: the brilliant scientist who unmasked an international conspiracy while exposing her husband's infidelity through an elaborate character. Rose watched the city from her new apartment in Mid-Levels, a space all her own that represented her regained independence. The boxes from the move were still stacked in the corners, but she was in no hurry to organize them. Each item unpacked was a conscious decision about what to take to her new life. The lawyers have finalized the terms of the divorce, Minha informed her, handing over a folder as she settled onto the newly delivered sofa. Max has agreed to everything. I think he's more worried about the criminal investigations into the data manipulation. And Sophia? Rose asked, flipping through the documents absent-mindedly. She disappeared completely after Singapore, but sources say she's negotiating immunity in exchange for information about the military consortium. Rose's phone vibrated with the message from James. He was on his way with dinner. In recent weeks, he had become a constant presence in her life, but they were both navigating this rapprochement with caution and respect. Mr. Nakamura called earlier, Rose commented, taking a seat next to her friend. The new independent research division starts operating next month. He wants to hold a launch event in Tokyo. With you as the protagonist, I imagine, Minha smiled. The scientist who chose truth over power. It's quite a story. Rose reflected on how her life had changed in recent months. The transformation into Arya Son, initially planned as revenge against Max, had turned out to be a catalyst for her own metamorphosis. James arrived with Thai food and a bottle of wine, his gentle smile lighting up the room. Jennifer sent over the latest reports, he informed as he organized the containers on the makeshift table. The tests with the new treatment protocol are promising. Speaking of Jennifer, Minha interrupted, checking her phone. She just sent me something interesting. It seems that Max is trying to negotiate with investors in Shanghai. Let him try, Rose replied with a calm that surprised even herself. His reputation on the market is destroyed. No one's going to risk associating with him anytime soon. As they ate dinner, discussing the next steps for the research and the company, Rose realized how comfortable she felt in this new arrangement. There was no longer any need for masks or performances. She could simply be herself. I have a proposal, James spoke up after a moment of contemplative silence. Stanford is organizing a symposium on applied nanotechnology. They want you to be the keynote speaker. Rose raised her eyebrows in surprise. Going back to Stanford, it would be a poetic restart, Minha added, where it all began, but now on your own terms. The idea of returning to the place where her story with Max had begun, but now as a completely different woman, carried a symbolism that didn't escape Rose. It was like closing one circle to start another. Besides, James added softly, we could take the opportunity to visit some old places. That cafe where we used to study still exists. The look they exchanged carried the weight of shared memories and future possibilities. Mine, sensing the moment, discreetly began to collect the empty plates. Speaking of coffee, she commented casually, I have to go. I have an early meeting tomorrow with the company's lawyers. They want to discuss the restructuring of the board. After Minha left, Rose and James found themselves alone, sharing a comfortable silence on the balcony. The city shimmered beneath them, a carpet of lights that seemed to reflect the infinite possibilities opening up. About Stanford, Rose finally said, I think I accept, but not just for the symposium. James looked at her questioningly and she continued, maybe it's time to rewrite some memories, create new ones. No masks this time? He asked with a soft smile. No masks, she confirmed. Aria's song taught me that sometimes we need to lose ourselves to find ourselves. But now I just want to be Rose Kim. Her phone rang. It was Jennifer with updates on the lab's new security protocols. As Rose discussed technical details, James noticed how she seemed lighter, more confident, completely in her element. The night advanced in Hong Kong, and with it, Rose felt the certainty grow that her true transformation had not been the creation of Arya Som, but the rediscovery of herself through that experience. The future was opening up before her, no longer as an obligation or a role to play, but as a blank canvas awaiting her own choices. The Stanford Auditorium was packed when Rose took the stage for her keynote address at the Nanotechnology Symposium. The moment carried a symbolism that did not go unnoticed. 10 years ago, she had been just a PhD student presenting her first discoveries in this very venue. Nanotechnology isn't just about manipulating microscopic particles, she began, her firm voice echoing through the room. It's about transformation, about how the smallest changes can trigger the biggest impacts. From the front row, James watched her with a discreet smile, while Minha, who had flown in specially from Hong Kong for the event, recorded everything on her tablet. Rose's presentation wasn't just about scientific breakthroughs, it was a manifesto on research integrity and the importance of keeping science free from corporate manipulation. The last few months have taught us a valuable lesson, she continued, provoking murmurs from the audience who knew her story through the media. True innovation is only possible when we maintain our integrity, even if that means standing up to established powers. After the lecture, while receiving congratulations from colleagues and students, Rose spotted a familiar figure at the back of the auditorium. It was Jennifer, who had taken over the coordination of the lab in Hong Kong during her absence. The new security protocols are working perfectly, Jennifer reported during the coffee break. And Mr. Nakamura has sent the final documentation for the joint venture with the new research division. And Max? Rose couldn't help asking. Latest news indicates that he's in Shanghai, trying to rebuild his career, Minha replied, joining them. But with the ongoing investigations, he's not having much success. The Stanford campus was especially beautiful that fall afternoon. After the formalities of the symposium, Rose and James walked through the familiar gardens, recalling moments from the past while building new ones in the present. Remember that bench? James pointed to a spot shaded by an ancient tree. That's where you first explained to me your theory about targeted nanoparticles. And where you told me I was crazy for wanting to defy established protocols, Rose added with a smile. Some things never change. Others change completely, he replied softly, his fingers finding hers in a natural gesture. The evening found them in the old cafe, where they used to study, now renovated but still retaining its original charm. Minha and Jennifer joined them, turning dinner into a small celebration. To the future of John Biotech, Minha raised her glass. Now officially renamed Kim Biotechnology. For the truth, Jennifer added. To new beginnings, James added, his eyes meeting Rose's. Rose's phone vibrated with a message from Mr. Nakamura. The first testing phase of the original treatment had been approved in Tokyo. Her work, finally free of manipulation, was ready to help people around the world. You know what's funny? Rose commented, putting her cell phone away. For so long, I thought I had to transform myself into someone else in order to be seen. But in the end, it was by being truly myself that I found my strength. The conversation flowed naturally into future plans. The new company would establish research centers in Seoul, Hong Kong, and now also at Stanford, where James would coordinate the American division. What about us? He asked later, as they walked back to the hotel under the starry California sky. I think I've spent enough time wearing masks, Rose replied, stopping to stare at him. Now I want to see where this authentic version of me takes us. The kiss they shared was unlike any other. There was no more past to reconcile or a future to fear, just the present moment full of possibilities. Back in Hong Kong the following week, Rose found her new office decorated with a single framed Venetian mask, a gift from Luna, who had become a close friend. Next to it, a simple note. Never forget that sometimes we need to lose ourselves in order to find ourselves. The view of Hong Kong Bay through the panoramic windows was breathtaking, but Rose's eyes were fixed on the new contracts on her desk. Kim Biotechnology would not be just another pharmaceutical company, it would be a model of ethical and transparent research. Ready for the board meeting? Minha asked, entering the room with a pile of documents. More than ready, Rose replied, standing up. It's time to show the world that we can do revolutionary science without compromising our integrity. As she walked to the meeting room, Rose reflected on her journey. The shy scientist who had behind scars had transformed into a confident leader. Arya Song, her most daring creation, had only been a catalyst for a much deeper metamorphosis. The future was opening up before her like a fascinating experiment, no longer controlled by rigid protocols or other people's expectations, but guided by her own truth. And this time, there was no need for masks to face it.